You're listening to A Slice of Therapy with me, Alun Parry. So imagine that someone that you really care about is walking towards traffic. And you see them there and they're walking and it's a busy road. And they just seem oblivious to the fact that there's a busy road there and they're walking towards the road. And it doesn't look like they're going to stop. And you're not close enough to be able to reach out and grab them back to safety. And you can see that if they carry on walking, they're going to get hit. So how do you actually reach them? How do you actually call them and alert them? What kind of voice would you use to alert them to the danger? One option is that you'd be really polite about it. You'd be really kind of timid and gentle about it. And you'd say, excuse me, I don't really want to be the person who tells you what to do, but, maybe it might be a good idea to pause right now. What do you think? We probably wouldn't use that voice because it's far too urgent and we're far too scared for them. So we would probably scream at them at the top of our voice. Stop! Just stop! Now, if you just take that out of context, you'll probably notice that tone doesn't sound too nice. That's not really the way you would go round and talk to anybody that you cared about in an ordinary situation. The voice sounds harsh. It's loud and shouty. It almost sounds critical. And yet nobody would blame you for shouting like that in this instance, because who wouldn't use a loud, harsh voice, as loud and harsh as possible, in a situation like this to protect somebody that you really care about from a perceived danger? I'm guessing that you'd have done or said pretty much anything to stop them from carrying on walking forward at that moment. And the reason why I'm mentioning this and drawing your attention to the harsh voice that you would no doubt use in this situation is because many of us also carry around a harsh voice in our own heads that is aimed at us. And it's our self-talk. And that's harsh too, isn't it? That's often sounding critical. That often says things which are not that nice to hear in a tone of voice that doesn't seem that kind. They'll say things like, who the hell are you to be thinking that you can do that? Who said you can feel happy? What are you doing thinking that you can feel proud of yourself? You failed. That means you're stupid. They're really, really harsh voices. They don't talk nicely to us, this kind of self-talk voice that we carry at all. They almost seem like enemies, like they're trying to drag us down. And whenever we're brave enough and courageous enough to spread our wings out, the voice comes along to try and clip us back again, to try and put us back into our box. And when we're carrying around this voice, this self-talk with us, it's no wonder it's hard to reach our potential sometimes. We've got these enemies in our own heads, getting in our own way. Now, I call them enemies, but what if they're not actually enemies? What if they're friends? Now, you might say, well, what kind of friend is going to talk to me in that kind of way? And yet, isn't that the kind of voice that we use in the example before with the busy road? We use a harsh tone of voice. We used an exclamation mark. We said, "Oi, stop." And so what if, in the same way, this self-talk, this critical voice that we carry around with us, what if they use that harsh voice for the same reason that we use the harsh voice in that example? Not because they hate you, but because they're actually on your side and they're scared for you. What if they're being so harsh because, like you, with the traffic scenario earlier, they actually want to protect you. And like you, they'll do whatever they can in order to give you that protection. So they see a danger and they come to the rescue, even if that means talking to you horribly. They see you doing something that they think is dangerous, and they will say whatever they can say in whatever harsh tone they can use in order to make sure that you stop doing the thing that they think is dangerous. And so maybe the real problem with these voices isn't that they're enemies. Maybe the real problem isn't even that they trash talk us in the way that they do. Maybe the real problem is that they're seeing danger when it's no longer there. Perhaps what they're seeing is danger that is from years ago. And this critical voice maybe was shaped many, many years ago, that if you did those kind of things, if you spread your wings in those situations, that it actually was pretty dangerous in some way, that it wasn't safe for you to do that. And so it learned to create this harsh voice in order to stop you doing that dangerous thing. And so, even though you've outgrown that situation today, the voice is still kind of stuck in the past. It hasn't updated itself. It's like an old piece of software rather than the latest version. And so even though you've got lots more resources today, that voice is kind of locked in time. And so it still talks to you in this harsh way. Not because it doesn't like you, but because it does. And it's trying to protect you from a danger. But a danger that perhaps isn't there anymore. And so when you spread your wings, what this critical sounding voice remembers is that once upon a time, doing that really wasn't safe. And so it panics, gets anxious for you. It sees you moving towards something that it thinks is dangerous for you. And so it starts to scream, just as you would scream if somebody that you cared about was heading towards danger as well. It's shouting at you in that way, perhaps, because it's willing to do anything to keep you away from this danger that it perceives. The thing is, though, like we said, it's stuck in the past. It's basing its fears around something that were back then, that is no longer dangerous, and yet it hasn't updated its view. And so when you check it out and ask, well, is this really still dangerous in the present? Or is this critical voice still reacting to things from the past? You'll find probably that this is stuff from the past, that your critical voice, that harsh voice that you carry around with you, is still living in and is still trying to protect you from to this day. So what if you changed the way that you view the self-talk? Not as something oppressive or antagonistic or that's trying to drag you down in any sort of malicious way, but as a friend. Just a really panicky, out-of-date, misled friend. The kind of friend who really cares for you but is overzealous. And frankly a little bit daft because it doesn't have all the information anymore. And what if you thought of it that it wasn't trying to keep you small. It was trying to keep you safe. It wasn't trying to scare you for its own sake. It was trying to protect you. What if you saw this panicky, anxious, misled friend that is desperate to protect you as something that actually you need to soothe and educate about the new reality? What if this was a voice that you actually asked a question of, this is really scared for me, so what does it need from me in order to stand down? What does it need to see me doing that allows it to retire from its job as protecting? You see, these kind of critical voices, we can actually get curious about them and explore them and find out what they do. We can get interested in them, not as something that is necessarily malicious, but as a friend. We can find out what its tricks are, what its techniques are, what its intentions for us are, what it believes in, what lies that it tells us in order to get us to do what it wants us to do. We can even find out what it is that it does want us to do, and why. And so when I'm working with someone, especially if there's a long-standing issue there, then I will often get curious about that and almost create an external person of this critical voice and get interested in what it is that is motivating it. Like, why is it showing up? Why does it get panicky that it shouts in a harsh voice and almost seems like it wants to bring us down a peg or two? And what we usually find is that it doesn't really want us to go down a peg or two inherently. It's just that it views us as safer when we do kind of hide ourselves. When we do go down a peg or two, it relaxes there because it views that as the safest place for us to be. Probably because of something in our history. And so to recap then, we started off, didn't we, with this example of a loved one walking towards a busy road and how harsh you might shout in order to get that person's attention. And we saw the link there between how harsh our own critical voices are sometimes, and that perhaps they're motivated by the same love and care and need for protection as when we would shout in the same way if we saw somebody doing something that we thought was dangerous. And we saw as well how if we get curious about that critical voice, we might actually realise that it is a friend, but just a really misled and jumpy and ill-informed friend that is trying to protect us, but whose information is so outdated that it might be an interesting alarm system, but it's certainly not a good advisor. And so one of the things that we can do is to actually externalize this voice. What we can do is really separate ourselves from the critical voice, treating it almost like some sort of friendly but ill-informed creature that we can find out more about. Because once we know that these thoughts that we have are not our own thoughts but the creature's, it allows us to separate. It allows us to build a relationship with it. But more importantly, it allows us to recognize it for what it is. Something that is trying to protect us, but is really, really outdated and overzealous. And it allows us then to make a decision. Do we really want to follow the advice of this outdated, albeit loving, little creature? So if you like this idea and you'd like to try it for yourself, you can work with me one-to-one. I'm Alun Parry, and you'll find out more at liverpoolpsychotherapy.co.uk. Of course, you don't have to be local because I work online as well, using video calls and telephone calls. And please subscribe to the podcast as well, because it's absolutely free and it means that you'll never miss an episode again. So thanks for listening, and I'll be back again tomorrow with another one.